Well, hello and welcome. I'm John Lindsay. This is Tom Price. And
Hello.
in this episode, we're going to be talking about water. And why is water important as we're dealing with a very important situation in downtown Sudbury. And that's the possible location of a new arena. Whether or not we need new arenas is another topic. But
Oh boy.
it's being located in an area that is, I guess, almost a swamp, some people say. Now, a swamp means water. What's important about water?
Well, several things are important about water, and I guess there's a general misimpression in the general public. People see water as only good. I mean, our bodies are 60% water.
Mm-hmm.
We use water for recreation. We use it for growing food. I mean, water is a wonderful element.
Mm-hmm.
But what most people don't realize is that water is the most deadly of all things on earth. Water has killed more people, more humans, than any other action on earth.
You mean through flooding and, I mean, besides just accidents of drowning?
Oh yes, like flooding, washing away hillsides and collapsing and creating avalanches. Frozen water in the form of snow, you get avalanches. You get diseases such as diphtheria and typhoid, those things carried by water. It's a deadly medium.
Now, in water, when you're considering building, unless you're building a houseboat, when you're putting a structure up, you're putting it on ground, but involved in that ground is water.
Yes.
And you know that when you dig down, in many cases, you come across what many people consider to be, I think it's called a water table,
Yes.
and that's underneath the actual soil itself. The water is down underneath there.
Yes, it is.
Now, how far down can it be in various areas?
Oh, it can be almost at surface, or it can be down several hundred feet. For example, if you go to the western U.S., you'll find that the water table is down 300 to 400 feet or more. At the site where they want to put the event center, it's only down 3 meters, which is little over 7 feet.
So that means if you're digging down approximately 6 or 7 feet, you're coming across water. Now, why is that a concern?
It's only a concern about the soils that are present and how far you have to go through those water-saturated soils before you can reach solid ground, in this case bedrock, to set your foundations on. If you don't do that, the alternative, and this works, you can put in floating foundation or a floating slab and float your building up to a certain limit of weight for the building, because it has to be able to float on top of that water.
You mean like a boat?
Like a boat.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Now, a thing like the event center or a convention center, parking garage, floating those is not in the game. Like, the weight of them is just too extreme for the area to them to float on the water.
It'd have to be very, very large.
Yes, very large.
Now, of course, this south section of the city that's been declared an area where possibly future development can take place. Buildings have been expropriated in certain cases, and other cases just bought out. But there's a whole lot of land there, and this could be the possible location of the new event center. But is that a suitable location, and how do we know if it's suitable or not?
Well, typically you pick things that are suitable by the amount of money you're prepared to invest in them.
Right.
Okay. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily apply in the case of politicians. What they see as looking good for them is how they decide. Yes, you can build an event center there. Yes, you can build a convention center there. The cost to support those buildings gets out of hand for normal people and normal industry, normal businesses. As far as we can tell, as far as OTCOC is looked at, the city isn't concerned about cost. After all, we got taxpayers. They can pay for it. and consequently the cost of getting out of that swamp that you referred to is exorbitant. We should not even be considering it.
Isn't it sort of logical that when you're planning something, regardless of what it may happen to be, you do a little bit of work, preliminary work, exploratory work, and that sort of thing? Now, the city has done that. They've hired a firm to look at the ground, at the soil conditions, and those reports, they haven't been terribly extensive, but they seem to be revealing in a way.
Oh, very revealing. EXP Services, which used to be William Troe, are experts in the field of geotechnical work, which is the ground, soil conditions, and they were allowed to drill 4 boreholes to determine the conditions on that site. And those 4 boreholes were very revealing. And in fact, what they indicate is it's not a good site to build those buildings.
Now, some of the holes went down quite far down into I don't know what you call it, soil or earth.
Into the overburden.
Okay, right. So that's the technical term.
Yes.
So what did it actually reveal?
Well, on the southern portion of the block that they're talking about, it revealed that about 115 to 120 feet is before you hit bedrock, and that the overburden above that is saturated with water from about 7 feet down to the bedrock is saturated with water. On the far corner, close to Minto and Brady, they went down 155 feet and never hit bedrock. Previous boreholes closer to the bakery that was there, the Golden Grain, were down to 130 feet and never contacted bedrock. Boreholes in that area. However, the water level was still 7 feet below ground. So you had 7 feet from 155 feet. You've got 138 feet of water before you can contact bedrock. That's not a problem if the soils are such that they consolidate in the water, but these soils didn't consolidate.
What does that mean by consolidate?
Compact, so that you have very little water contained in the soil.
Okay.
It's like saying a sponge, if you consolidate it and squeeze it until all the rubber is in contact with each other, it holds no water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, soil's the same thing. Now, when you let it loose of it, it can hold that water again. And have you ever tried to support a load on a sponge? Right. Okay.
Now, certain methods can be employed, and I understand that. Just going over very, very, very quickly, there's strip or spread footings. What is that?
Well, strip or spread footing is what you'll see in most housing applications, where the developer or the contractor will come in and he'll put a footing around the perimeter of the building.
Okay.
Okay, that's a strip footing.
Right.
Spread footing. The walls come down and they spread the load through that footing to the ground below it.
Right.
Then inside of that strip footing, you have a basement, which is a poured concrete, but that poured concrete only carries the live load on it, the people walking on it.
Right.
It doesn't carry the house load.
The house load is carried by the
strip foundation.
Now, there's another, the raft, the floating foundation, which I understand. I think our post office downtown is sort of in that situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Sort of like a boat.
Yeah, and I think the theater center, I believe, is on that as well. Basically, to put it in simple terms, you create a bathtub or a boat that can hold out the water and support the load.
Yeah.
And supporting the load of an arena is massive. So the boat that you need is so extensive that it really makes no sense. And that's what the soils report from EXP said.
Yeah, it's not appropriate. Then there's the steel and bearing piles. This is where you sink these piles deep into the earth.
That's right. Well, you drive them in, you don't sink them in.
So why is that not good? They say that's not appropriate either. Why not?
You don't know where you're going to hit bedrock to start with, and if the bedrock is sloping, when the end of that pile hits the bedrock, what stops it from diverting, unless there's sufficient compacted soil around it to hold it vertical,
Right.
it's going to go with the slope of the bedrock.
Yeah. Another one is the caissons. Now that we've seen that in, I've looked at when they're building bridges or tunnels or that sort of
Yes.
thing. That's fairly elaborate though.
Yes, caissons, and they work. They're fantastic. If you have the flexibility that you can isolate, and they do this in bridges across rivers and that. They build cofferdams around to keep the water out. They excavate till they get to rock, and then they build their caisson on top of that.
Right.
Okay, but they make sure that the rock is flat where the caisson is sitting, because they don't want it sliding down that rock surface either.
No. Very, very
Very cost
costly
intensive.
and time consuming as well
Yes.
too. And the other one they talk about is micropile foundations. But they also talk about a lot of testing required for something. What are they talking about here?
Well, micropile foundations are small piles of concrete with a steel core, and you put a whole bunch of them in, and it acts as one big pile. However, it's not that easy, because you're into a situation where typically they range from 6 to 12 inch, mostly in the 10-inch range. But you've got to have a casing there when you're in water to keep the water out while you build those, because they're filled with concrete. And how do you get the concrete? They call it grout, and it is a grout. But you have to pump in the grout and displace the water after you've got the hole dug. Okay, and you bore the hole as you go down, and you can put in the grout as you go down, but it's a very difficult process.
Wow.
And there's no guarantee that it's going to withstand the forces on it. Caltran, which is the California Transportation Department, banned the use of micropiles in soils, and I believe I have it in the wording here.
Yeah, because you've done a lot of research on this, and of course you have experience,
Yes.
as I think in previous recordings we have mentioned your experience, of course, around the world and dealing with various projects, working with INCO for many, many years on projects, and you've acquired a wealth of experience in dealing with situations where a project can be considered, but upon further examination, maybe it's not really the way to go. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And in fact, in the late 70s, I worked on a project at the copper refinery, working with the predecessor to EXP, William Trow Associates. We did consolidate the soil in order to get higher load capability for some of the columns for a change we were making to the process. So it is possible to consolidate some of these soils and increase the load carrying capability of the soils. And I've worked on that. And in fact, that same individual had a policy. He said, when the soil conditions are in doubt, get out. It was that simple.
Well, it would seem that we may have a similar situation here, but it appears that there's a commitment, because council did approve by unanimous decision to build a new arena.
Yes.
And of course the land has been cleared. It was considered that the arena would go in that particular area, and other amenities, maybe a hotel, maybe a convention center, in that same area. But as you just said, perhaps maybe this isn't the area to be considered.
Well, typically what you do is you make sure of your location before you start to make a decision on what you're going to put there. And in fact, the EXP report is full of recommendations where they say, for example, the caissons. They can't recommend the caissons until they know the load that has to go on it, and they highly recommend that you put in a caisson or two and test the load carrying capability before you finalize the design. They did the same thing for the micropiles. You have to put in some and test them, because they can't guarantee it. The soil conditions between the bedrock and where you start are such, and for example, micropiles, The reason that the Caltrans says that you can't use them is what they call slenderness ratio. That's the length of the pile divided by the diameter of the pile. And that means it can bend, it can do all kinds of things unless you have sufficient of them in and they are properly anchored and the soil can retain them.
Now, in the present arena, we know that there are a number of steel piles. They came from Sault Ste. Marie way back 1951.
Yeah.
And also a lot of wooden piles were put in as well, too. And that arena has not shown any sinking or cracking at that particular time. Now, was there any research done on that, or was it just blind luck, or what?
No, I think there was a lot of research work done before it. We have no record of the research that was done, that I'm aware of anyway. But in those days, for example, in the 50s, they typically would have looked for solid rock, exposed rock to build on. Okay. Here, where you want the ice surface below grade, they were probably glad to see rock was at a little bit deeper depth. And so therefore they put in the piles for the ice surface.
These are the steel piles that supported the ice surface.
Yes.
Which has remained stable over that period of time.
Yes.
Up until now. Yeah.
Then on the perimeter, and you can imagine this the same as a house, the perimeter foundation for that building is supported on wood piles. And there's it just frustrates me no end. The wood piles, people are saying, oh, they're rotted and on and on and on. Wood does not rot under water deprived of oxygen. If you want proof of that, go to the desert, what do they call, petrified forest.
That's right.
Park in Arizona.
Yeah.
There are trees there that were underwater, and mineralization into the wood created them as stone. They are literally rock if they're protected from oxygen and kept submerged. And that's what happens with wood. I doubt if in the time period that the arena's been there that those are petrified, but that's what happens over time. So wood doesn't necessarily rot if it's in water and there's no oxygen.
We have a good example in Mineral Acre. A sawmill was there, and every year slabs keep appearing, and they're solid. Some of them I think are actually petrified.
The Ottawa River, they're still logging the Ottawa River for logs that sank 100 years ago.
But getting back to our particular situation here now, should there be more test holes dug? Is there any consideration? I know that staff says that, well, we just have to keep looking for the best spot to go in that area. Do you think there is a good spot in that area?
I don't believe there is. And it depends on what you call good. And good has to be something that's economically viable. And of course, for politicians, everything is economically viable because they have us taxpayers. But for the taxpayers, well, for example, the KED would have been founded on bedrock.
That's right.
So leveling rock to set that on is not a high cost item compared to what we're into in the swamp. And why would you go in the swamp? Now, if you can pre-compress all that soil, and this is what they've done, I'm sure people have seen this on the major highways, they will put a surcharge of rock on top of where the highway is going to go for a couple of years before they build the highway there.
That's right, yeah.
And that allows it to compress what's under it to squeeze the water out of the sponge. Okay? Once that's done, then they can build on top of it, and it's not going to settle that much. But are you going to put a surcharge on that site where the golden grain used to be? When economically you can build 2- and 3-story buildings there and have a nice market square or whatever you want there and make it profitable.
Or as some people have said, that perhaps now that we have the parking for the present arena, possibly we should, I know that just the other day I was there, and that whole area, almost the whole area, was full of cars.
It is this morning.
So it's there. We already have the parking for the arena.
Yeah.
And the question is the arena satisfactory? Is it, can it be saved, as it were?
I don't know why it wouldn't be. Yes, it can be saved, and yes, it can be modified to do whatever we want, and we can do that for a lot less than what the city is calling 200 million, but is actually closer to 500 million.
This is, of course, including the actual interest cost and other auxiliary costs that might be incurred, as with the School of Architecture, because they ran into somewhat similar situations when it came to establishing their new section of the building.
Yep.
And how did they deal with that?
They spent the money and put in piles. And I think somebody mentioned to me, I think it was either 10 or $14 million extra for that.
So we're really dealing with an economic situation besides a practical situation.
Yes.
So the present arena is considered by the city of Sudbury as the heart of the downtown. So really, moving it to another area would be moving what is considered to be a facility for the downtown as an asset.
Well, I love the term the heart of the downtown, except that heart only beats on weekends.
And sometimes in the evening, yeah.
Rarely, but during the week, it's not a population attracting event center, if you will. Most of the events that will happen and that will be booked are weekend events, because that's when people are off work.
Yep.
Okay, and so, yeah, maybe it's a heartbeat, but it only beats on weekends, and can we afford to keep it alive during the week? Well, it isn't a matter of being able to afford to keep it alive. Can we even populate it during the week?
Well, these are all real considerations. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but really in this particular broadcast, we've been looking at the situation with respect to suitability and clearing a large stretch of land, removing properties, and then discovering that perhaps the land is not suitable for what was intended. That really, I think it was pretty obvious that the city wanted to establish a new arena on this particular section of property, but it may not be suitable.
That's right.
So what would be the logical, if you were looking at it from, let's say, a commercial aspect or a private aspect, if you were looking at that particular situation like a large corporation, what would the analysis be?
Well, typically what you would do is you would take a look at it and you'd say, okay, how much will it cost to be able to build there just to get out of the ground? And if the advantages cost-wise of being in that location can justify the additional cost of doing that, then you would go ahead and do it. However, it is very difficult to imagine any set of circumstances that would justify that additional cost for an arena or a convention center, because they do not make money. Okay? And if they don't make money, who's going to pay for it? Well, we're going to pay out of our taxes. It's that simple. But before you even went there, you would do a soils investigation to determine the suitability. And that's what EXP recommend in their report. You've got to do a lot more work before you can decide whether you can even want to build there. So we haven't done our homework, and I don't know what they've been doing for since 2015, because we spent a lot of money. And in the paper the other day, Mr. Chakouti said, well, we haven't even started to develop this. Excuse me? $25 million already spent, and we haven't even started?
And we're even looking at possible designs for the new arena, which would include such amenities as, I believe, a sauna, some exercise rooms, special dressing rooms, and that sort of thing for the Sudbury Wolves, which we do support the Wolves, of course. But I'm just wondering, should taxpayers be paying for these sort of amenities for a private organization?
Well, I would answer that by asking the question of, who do taxpayers pay for Tim Hortons outlets? Do they pay for Walmart stores? Do they pay for any private industry?
Yeah.
And that's what the Wolves are. It's a private business.
Well, we certainly should devote another episode to that sort of discussion and really what we should be looking at in Sudbury as priorities and becoming more transparent as well. But I think that this time around we've looked at soil conditions, which really, where are we going to build something? Is it going to be built to last? Is it going to be, economical? Is it going to be reasonable? What's going to be the effect if you do build something there on the parking that's already there? What are you going to do with the present arena facility? All these questions. Sounds like we have another broadcast lined up for that, Tom.
Yes, we do, and the soils experts have said unequivocally in their report, you need to do a lot more soils investigation before you can make those decisions.
Thank you, Tom Price of our Town, Our City Institute, for being with us and bringing us up to date on something that's very important and which all citizens should be concerned. And once again, we are willing at any time to talk to any councillor, any city staff person, or the mayor with respect to these important issues. So until next time, Tom.
Thank you for the opportunity, John.
And thanks for you for viewing. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.